control area.
Well, they created a drug so the pilots could fly overnight.
Yeah, methamphetamine, exactly. Right. That's what they used during for pilots. And, of course, there's a tie between that. If we have time, we can get to it. But there's a tie between that drug and the Kennedy assassination through this one person, Max Jacobson, Dr. Feelgood, who was a German doctor, fled Germany, went to Vienna, was turned in Vienna by the Soviets, at least that's what his FBI file says, turned in Vienna by the Soviets, winds up in the United States in the 1940s, winds up in the 1950s administering liquid amphetamine shots to people like Milton Blackstone, Eddie Fisher, Eddie Cantor, a lot of the stars in the 50s, gets introduced to JFK, shoots him up with liquid methamphetamines right before the first debate with Nixon. Kennedy is like a monster in that debate, beats the crap out of Nixon. This was Kennedy whose back was killing him, who was still taking 5 Novocaine shots a day, who had Addison's disease that was weakening his whole adrenal system, and had no voice left, right? He demolishes Nixon in that debate, and that really turned the election around. Not to mention Joe Kennedy's buying the graveyard list from Sam Giancana, but all that aside, Kennedy is hooked for the next few years, and even Bobby Kennedy wants him off it. So he goes to Vienna. Jacobson comes along with him to Vienna in 1962. Khrushchev knows that the KGB has a man in the White House. The CIA knows that Jacobson is in the White House as Kennedy's doctor. So both guys, so it's spy versus spy with this guy. This guy is basically shooting up Kennedy. He's warning Kennedy that he's giving him too much drugs. He overdoses him on liquid meth. Kennedy is a blubbering, incomprehensible idiot. Kennedy overdosed in New York and was literally, they had to bring him down. He was running around naked through the Carlisle Hotel. I met the psychiatrist who injected him with Thorazine just to bring him down, Lawrence Hutterer. And so here's Kennedy running around, and Khrushchev realizes they have this guy, hence the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you wonder if someone at the CIA, and I can give you the names of someone, and the generals like a Curtis LeMay, realize that this guy's really a loose cannon. He's taking LSD. Lily's bringing LSD to the White House. He's taking LSD. He's on liquid meth. He's out of control. But he's very popular. So what do? You go to Lyndon Johnson, who's going to go to jail because of Bobby Baker and Billy Saul Estes, and you say, look, this is like Monopoly. You have a choice. You can pass go and collect your $200 and wind up in the White House, or go directly to jail. What do you want to do? Here's Johnson, who made $30 million in the most regulated industry in the country in the 1940s and 50s, and he's in the Senate Majority Leader. I mean, what's he going to say? He has his own agenda. So, in other words, they were experimenting with drugs. Get back to your point. I'm sorry, I digress. But they're with drugs, and all these folks come to the United States at the end of the war.
Exactly.
But it's funny because you also trace the roots of Nazi, and I hope we maybe talk about this a little bit. You also trace the roots of this, the occult background of the Nazis, from the 19th century Helena Blavatsky, who Shirley MacLaine so happily played in the movies.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and the Theosophists hate when I bring this up, but, and I feel for them because there's, if you talk to Theosophists today, they're certainly not Nazis. But, Blavatsky had a lot of influence over the rise of a lot of the groups around the Nazi Party that gave rise to the Nazi Party. There was a whole social Darwinism thing. I mean, Darwin cast a blow against organized religion when he said that there was evolution, especially against Christianity, because suddenly evolution seemed to call into question the whole, created the world and everything in 6 days story that you find in Genesis. So religion was casting about for some way to respond, and Blavatsky provided it. She said, well, yeah, there is spiritual evolution. And there are races that are less evolved and races that are more evolved. And one of the more evolved races is Aryan, and their symbol is the swastika, which you'll find in a lot of the old theosophical books that were printed while she was alive. You'll find a swastika symbol printed on the spine of the book and on the front page. So they even incorporated the Aryan Theosophical Society in New York City back in the 1880s. So this was the consciousness that they had, that there was a super race, an evolved race. And her writings about the Jews in, I believe it's Isis Unveiled, I don't have the citation in front of me, but were very derogatory. I mean, she did have a very low opinion of Jewish people. She thought maybe the Afghans were the lost tribes of Israel, and they had more right to be called Jews than the Jews did, according to Blavatsky. So you had this combination of, an exalted race, an advanced, evolved race called the Aryans, and then you had these sort of mongrel races that were spiritually less pure, spiritually less evolved. And Darwin's, concept of survival of the fittest and, kill or be killed and all of this fit perfectly into the system. So you had guys like Guido von List developing these wild, very complicated theories based on, Blavatsky's ideas, and throwing in some Kabbalah here and there, and throwing in Nordic paganism, and making this kind of stew that was very attractive to a lot of people. You had Lanz von Liebenfels, Catholic monk, a person who had studied theology and Oriental religions, and formed his own order of the Knights Templar, the Order of the New Templars, he called it, a few miles from where Hitler was born in Austria.
Yes. Now, you take that, and you take the whole Blavatsky stream, then you add to that Maria Orsic, and the Vril, and you put those together, and it's after the war in Germany, and Himmler looks at this stuff and says, hey, wait a minute. This is good stuff.
Sure.
I mean,
no, Himmler related to this, very, very strongly. Himmler loved this stuff.
Yeah, he did. And so you've got the life force, the Vril.
But does this lead us in any way to the Nine?
It does. Because where does the Aryan race stem from? Yes, from Iceland. Yes, from Greenland. Yes, from the poles. But ultimately, where did Maria Orsic and her group of women, by the way, they were Jewish.
And they were very beautiful.
And where do they point to? They point to the distant planet Aldebaran as the origin of the Aryans, of the Aryan race. And of course, hence the Nazis go all over the world, and you're right, they go to India and they look at the Vedic text, they read about the Vimana, they read about the spaceships the Vimana fly, and they're looking at the origins off-planet of the Aryan race. Now, so it's a UFO cult?
Sure.
I mean, is that what we're talking about?
Well, there's a UFO component to it. The whole hollow Earth and world ice theories all have a UFO component. There's an Atlantis component to it as well. Himmler had an operation called the Deutsches Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research Division, which was their occult bureau at the SS. And these people, he had hired, archaeologists, anthropologists, all sorts of people to come up with proof that all of these wild theories were true. So the UFO concept was very much part of their mythology. There was an off-planet origin for all of this. The Tula Society, the Tula Gesellschaft, is named after this mythical land somewhere in the north. It could be Shambhala, it could have been in Tibet, it could have been somewhere in the North Pole, where a super race lived, and this super race came from the stars. The stellar origin was very much part of the Nazi mystique.
And then you add the whole Hegel theory of Übermenschen, of the Übermensch, right? But it's not Superman really, although it's translated as Overman, Superman, and Untermenschen, right? And you add that, and suddenly you've got a whole mystique of, who the perfect Aryan is, the blonde, blue-eyed, who are the ones who would be in the SS, et cetera, et cetera. But this takes us, if there is a kind of a UFO extraterrestrial component, this takes us to who were the nine communicating with, the descendants of the Forbes and the Astors and the Paynes and Arthur Young and people like that.
Yeah. I mean, I came across this connection almost by chance. I was laboriously going through the Warren Commission documents years and years ago. And as I'm going through them, I come across the testimony of Ruth Payne, the lady in Dallas, who, at whose home Lee Oswald and his wife Marina, his Russian wife Marina, and their children stayed while they were looking for an apartment. And when Lee and Marina split up sort of for a while, Marina was living with Ruth Payne, who wanted to learn Russian, so the story goes. So, I came across this. She's talking about going to Philadelphia a few months before the assassination, and casually, the connection is made to Arthur Young. And I just stood up. I thought, what? Arthur Young is involved in this? What? Who is Ruth Payne? And so doing the background check on that, I find this incredible story. The story of the American Orthodox Catholic Church is one piece of incredible history, but this thing with the 9 really was a mind blower. And here's Andrea Puharich. Here's a guy who's a major in the U.S. Army, stationed at Edgewood Arsenal, where they do the biological chemical warfare stuff. This is during the Korean War. And here's a guy who wants to weaponize paranormal abilities. He has this idea he wants to weaponize ESP, telekinesis, et cetera, et cetera. He thinks that the Department of Defense can use this. There's obviously a connection to the whole mind control brainwashing thing that was very much in the air at the time. But at the same time, he's running this little operation in Maine, in the state of Maine, in a small town, in a wooden house, and he has all of these famous people come over. Arthur Young and his wife, Ruth Forbes Payne Young, who was successively married to a number of people. He's married to Ruth, and he has there's an Astor, there's a Forbes, there's a DuPont. These are all the blue blood American families, and they all have representatives at this seance, and it's documented. The seance took place. This is not something that someone's speculating about. Puharich writes about it even, and they're all there having the seance. And there's a man from India who's acting as the medium. I contacted his family, and this was the first and only time in his entire life that he acted as a medium. And there he is, channeling something called the 9. There were 9 people at the seance, and there were these 9 entities hovering above them somehow. Some sort of extraterrestrial spaceship or something was hovering over this place in Maine. And they gave this group of 9 people their charge to go out there and to, do what they could for society, save the planet, that sort of thing. But it was very mysterious as to how this was going to take place. And their injunction was, we are 9 and you are 9 and you're our representatives. You are our human representatives on the planet. And
but
it's possible
who thought to have the seance and who thought that the 9 would contact them and stuff? In other words, was this set up the way the stuff with Jack Parsons was set up in the desert to perhaps it's called a not a happening and not an imagining. It's called the ritual, the rite when you try to conjure up a god.
A conjuration.
But in the case of 9, did Puharich know ahead of time that he had a plan for a mission or something with the 9?
There's no evidence that he did. He seemed to have brought these people together for a seance. I think he was trying to raise money, quite frankly, for some of his other operations, which would explain why all of these, wealthy people were in attendance. Yeah. It's a possible rationale. Or, Puharich died really without talking very much about what he was up to in Maine in the 1950s. I think he knew about the connections to the assassination. That's another.
Has anybody who was at that seance ever written about it?
Well, Uri Geller's not even speaking about Puharich.
No, but Puharich never wrote about it, and none of the other people ever put it in a diary or anything?
Puharich wrote about it, but none of the other people that I know of spoke of that seance.
Now, so they received some message, okay?
Well, do you think the 9 is still active?
Well, according to them, they are. I mean, when I wrote my first published Sinister Forces, I was contacted by people out of Esalen who were telling me, "Listen, stop trashing the 9. We're still channeling them. We're still, the 9 are alive and well." And I've gotten I got letters from them and other communications and saying, and I said, "Listen, did you read the book? I really didn't trash the 9. everything that I said in the book about the 9 was documented. It's, the connections to the assassination are